This is the story of a very brave young girl who survived a horrible experience and has turned it into something positive. Her name is Alicia Kozakiewicz. She is now in her late 20s. Her story begins back in 2001 when she was only 13 years old, and it is one of the first luring and kidnapping cases which occurred because of the internet. Alicia was a typical shy 13-year-old girl. She found confidence in chatting with her friends online. It became a common pastime for her. She did it in the living room on a family computer. She talked with her friends, and before long, also their friends. Then, friends of theirs. This is how she met him. He pretended to be a teenage boy who supported Alicia and listened to her. He said all the things she wanted to hear in order to gain her trust. They spoke for months online before he struck. Because of this, Alicia recommends that parents strictly monitor their children's activity online and off. Know who they speak with and where they go. She advises never give out any personal information online. The day came that Alicia agreed to meet her friend from online. New Year's Day, 2002. It was cold, and she planned on only being outside for a small while, so she didn't even bring a jacket. As she approached the area of the meeting, she heard someone call her name. But it was not a boy's, but a man's voice. The next part was a blur, as she only remembers being in the car with this creepy stranger. It was a 5-hour drive to the stalker's house. He had come from Virginia to snatch the poor girl from her happy home in Pittsburgh. During the ride, he would say things like, "Be good," or "Be quiet." When they arrived at his house, he dragged her down to the basement and pulled her by the hair, ripping some of it out. He told her in a cold voice, "You can cry if you want to. This is going to be difficult for you." She was terrified, and she saw in the basement what was essentially a dungeon, complete with tools and a cage. He attached a dog collar to her and dragged her up to his bedroom. There, he stripped her out of her clothes, broke her nose, and repeatedly raped her. He chained her to the floor so she had very limited mobility. The monster tortured this poor 13-year-old Alicia for 4 days. She was forced to do disgusting, demeaning, and unspeakable things during these long days. The final day, as he was going to work, he told her, "I'm beginning to like you too much. We're going to go for a drive when I get back." She knew this meant he was probably going to kill her that evening. She was too afraid to scream, imagining that he was outside the door, waiting to see if she would call for help. She said she always imagined her parents busting in and saving her, but that never happened. Instead, on that final day, she heard several men bust into the house. She was so scared that she hid under the bed. She was ordered out from under the bed by a man with a gun in his hand. She was completely naked and thought these guys were there to kill her because of what her tormentor had said earlier. As she came out from under the bed, she saw the most beautiful 3 letters on that man's jacket: FBI. She was so relieved. Turns out this sick bastard shared footage he recorded live stream of him torturing and abusing Alicia online with other guys for their enjoyment. One of the guys turned the footage over to the authorities for fear of being charged as an accomplice to this heinous crime. Anybody who finds this kind of thing entertaining should be aware of this fact. Simply watching this kind of filth without reporting it essentially makes you an accomplice. Alicia was reunited with her family, but sustained immense psychological damage from her experience. She suffered flashbacks and nightmares for years. She has dedicated her life to stopping these kinds of crimes from happening. She speaks at schools to raise awareness and started a group called the Alicia Project. The website is aliciaproject.org, and a link will be in the description of this video. Go there after this video to check it out. She has fought to enact Alicia's law in every state, which helps fund departments to stop this kind of crime. So, thank you, Alicia, for being a survivor and turning your horrendous story into something positive. You are indeed a brave young woman. The year was 1991, and 11-year-old Jaycee Dugard was walking to the school bus stop in Lake Tahoe, California. A car pulled up and rolled down the window. The trusting preteen thought the driver was just going to ask for directions, so she approached the car. Philip Craig Garrido was the driver of the car and a convicted sex offender. He zapped the little girl with a stun gun, while his wife, Nancy Garrido, dragged the girl into the car, where she proceeded to hold little Jaycee down for the entire 2-hour drive back to their house in Antioch. She was then locked in a soundproof shed in the backyard of their modest home. Philip threatened her with attack dogs if she tried to attempt an escape. The 11-year-old was repeatedly raped by Garrido during her 18 years of captivity. That's right, 18 years. Jaycee bore 2 daughters during this time. Garrido fathered the first daughter when Jaycee was only 14 years old, and a second in 1997 when she was 17. After the birth of the second daughter, Garrido sometimes would allow the 3 to sleep in a tent in the backyard instead of that hot storage shed. Garrido renamed Jaycee Alyssa, and she was only allowed to respond to that name. Eventually, Garrido trusted her enough that he would allow the girl to work in his print shop. She never asked for help during this whole time. Her ordeal finally ended in August of 2009, when Garrido tried to hold an event on the campus of University of California, Berkeley. The manager had noticed the girls were very pale and had acted robotic. She ran a background check on Garrido while he filled out the necessary paperwork. The background check returned with Garrido's status as a registered sex offender. The astute manager called the police, and Garrido was arrested, along with his wife Nancy. On a positive note, both Garrido and his wife were sentenced to life in prison, and Jaycee was awarded $20 million by the state of California for mishandling her case. Colleen Stan was 20 years old when she decided to hitchhike from Oregon to California. Hitchhiking was more common in 1977, when she then accepted a ride from a young couple with a baby. Colleen got into the car with the clean-cut couple when the driver, Cameron Hooker, pulled the Dodge Colt over. He then soon took a detour onto a dirt side road. Hooker then proceeded to pull a knife and place it against Colleen's throat. He commanded her to cooperate while his wife, Janice, conveniently stepped out of the car with their baby. Colleen was then handcuffed, and Hooker pulled out a special plywood box that he had made prior for this unlucky victim. He placed the box over her head. Colleen could hardly breathe in this heavily insulated box, much less see or hear. Once they arrived at the hooker's home, Cameron threatened to cut her vocal cords if she screamed. He then hung the poor girl from the ceiling in his basement by her wrists, and he began to mercilessly whip her dangling body. The couple then had sex on the floor while Colleen cried and whimpered in pain, hanging above them. Cameron had read an erotic novel and decided he wanted his own sex slave. His wife Janice went along with this plan to appease her husband. He forced Colleen to sign a contract that stated she would agree to become his sex slave and obey his every whim. Over the course of 7 years, Colleen was tortured by Hooker. He would beat her and punch her constantly, then rape her and use her as his own personal sex toy. She was forced to stay in a small wood box that Hooker had constructed to constrict her ability to move. The box was slid under their bed, and he would only bring her out when necessary, and in the evenings for his depraved torture and sex sessions. Janice released the slave when she became jealous that Cameron wanted to have a baby with Colleen and possibly acquire more slaves. Janice then became a witness for the state and received total immunity for her part in the crime. Cameron received 104 years in prison. "13-year-old Tanya Kach was troubled when her mom moved out of her house and her father decided to move his new girlfriend into their family home. Tanya began talking with a 37-year-old security guard who worked at her middle school. Thomas Hose provided an ear for Tanya and a shoulder to cry on. Tanya thought he was cool because he would give her candy and cigarettes. Before long, the two were making out when no one was looking, right on the school grounds. Early 1996, Tom convinced the naive 13-year-old to run away and come live with him in his parents' house in Pittsburgh. However, this wasn't exactly the romantic lovebird nest picture that he had painted for her. She was hidden away from his parents by locking her in his bedroom closet. She was given a bucket to use as a toilet, and Hose threatened to kill her family if she ever called for help. She was allowed to shower 1 time per week when his parents were sleeping. The poor girl survived like this for 4 years. Then Hose introduced her to his parents as Nikki, and they allowed her to move in. Overall, her captivity lasted for 10 years. Tanya was trained by Hose not to speak in public, and always to have her head down. Her timid demeanor aroused the suspicions of the local deli owners that Hose would often frequent. Tanya finally seized an opportunity to speak to them privately for just a few minutes. She told them her real name and begged them to help her. The owner called the police, and Tanya was finally rescued. Hose received a sentence of 5 to 15 years incarceration and was denied parole in 2012. Even at 7 years old, Stephen Stayner had a generous nature. In 1972, he was approached by a minister while walking home from school to help a church by donating some items. Stayner agreed, and then got into the car with Kenneth Parnell to be driven home. The only problem was that Parnell was no minister. He was, in fact, a convicted child molester. Parnell drove the 7-year-old boy to his cabin in Cathy's Valley, California. He then proceeded to molest and brainwash the young boy. He told the little boy that his parents could no longer afford him, and that his 4 siblings, so they appointed him his new guardian. He told him it was all legal, and he had better obey him. Parnell began calling Stephen Dennis, and told people he was his son. Parnell moved the boy around often, and gave him alcohol to keep him numb. He constantly tormented and sexually assaulted young Stephen for 7 years. Parnell decided Stephen was getting a little too old for him when he reached 14, so Parnell kidnapped a new, younger victim, 5-year-old Timmy White, to serve for his sadistic sexual pleasures. One evening, while Parnell was at work, Stephen grabbed little Timmy, and they escaped. He went to the local police station, and he had told them, "I know my first name is Stephen. I think my last name is Stayner." Stayner got married 3 years later in 1985, and he had 2 children. Most unfortunately and sadly, he was killed after a motorcycle accident in 1989. Astonishingly, due to lax California laws at the time, Parnell was only sentenced to 7 years and gained parole after 5.